Hello there, my name's Jake from JNJtabletop, and I have run the Dragon of Icespire Peak adventure, which is a playthrough you actually can find right here on this channel. While I did that, I certainly learned a few things along the way. I've made some mistakes, I've done some things that I've liked, and I had a ton of fun playing this with my friends. In this video, I'm going to go over some Dungeon Master tips to help you run the Dwarven Excavation adventure, which is one of the first ones in the Tier 1 quests if you're familiar with this series. Obviously, this video will contain spoilers, so if you are a player and playing in this adventure is something you're going to do, I'm not going to tell you not to watch the video, but I just trust that you're going to make a good decision for you. So before we get started, if you have any interest in running Dragon of Icespire Peak, or if you are just interested in Dungeons & Dragons in general, I'm guessing you are, that's probably why you clicked on this video, why don't you go down and hit the subscribe button, because here at JNJtabletop, Josh and I are really just trying to help you and your friends get the most out of your Dungeons & Dragons games. Now, the Dwarven Excavation quest is a quest that my players decided to go on while they were playing this, so why don't we take a quick look at the quest card and just make sure we understand things from their perspective. Dwarf prospectors found ancient dwarven ruins in the mountains southwest of here and have begun an archaeological dig for treasure and relics. They need to be warned that a white dragon has moved into the area. Take the warning to them, then return to Town Master Harbin Wester to collect a reward of 50 gold pieces. So there we are, the Dwarven prospectors here are the NPCs that are going to be the focal point for this adventure. Dazzlin Greyshard and Norbis Ironrune. These two dwarves are pretty simple, they're just looking for gold in the mountains, and a few months back they found evidence of a settlement that belonged to other dwarves that looks like it was buried in some kind of collapse, avalanche type event, and right now that's what they're doing, they're exploring it. Now, what Dazzlin and Norbis don't know is that hidden behind this settlement is an abandoned temple to the evil dwarven god of greed, Abathor. Now, Abathor, during a solar eclipse, would accept sacrifices of blood and gemstones, and one time after receiving what the adventure calls an unsatisfactory sacrifice, caused an avalanche to collapse the entire settlement, and any priests that may have survived this avalanche were actually turned into Ochre Jellies, and that was done to reflect his greed and avarice. Now, as far as the goals for this quest are concerned, the only thing that you have to do to satisfy the town master and to collect your reward is just go there, warn Dazzlin and Norbis that there's a white dragon in the area, and that's it. Now, the thing is, Dazzlin and Norbis have unfinished business here. So once they discovered the temple, they wanted to explore it. However, they ran into an Ochre Jelly and ran away because they're not warriors. They're not adventurers. They don't know how to do those kinds of things that the party can. So what they decide to do, because they are grateful to hear this warning, because obviously since they're not adventurers or the capable type, they don't want to get eaten by Cryovane. So they offer a pair of sending stones as a reward to the group if they could go clear the temple out of these Ochre Jellies and any other kinds of threats so that it would be easily explored. So when the group arrives here at the Dwarven Excavation site, I think the box text does a fine job here, and if you want to lean into just that this is old, abandoned, and, you know, looks like it's falling apart, I mean, yeah, you could kind of write your own stuff or just kind of go with what comes off the cuff, but the box text is pretty good here. When the group gets to section E2, it does say that this place has been picked clean by the dwarves because they've thoroughly explored it and just cataloged everything there. But I think it also could be more fun to maybe have a few trinkets or something that maybe wouldn't affect the game unless that's something you want to do, or maybe you feel like they need a particular item for whatever reason. You're the DM. I'm sure you have an idea of what's going on in your group. But I think you have an opportunity here to perhaps just bring this world to life a little bit and maybe lean into some backstories that your players may have had. And the trinket list in the player's handbook is a great place to start, but here's a list of some of the ones that I thought might be fun to just place one or two of these items here if you wanted. Suggested trinkets include a tiny gnome-crafted music box that plays a song you dimly remember from your childhood. Perhaps it's broken and sounds a bit out of tune now. A small, broken wooden statue of a smug halfling. A gemstone that looks like a lump of coal or like another piece of rubble when examined by anyone but you. 2 toy soldiers, one with a missing head. An old key. Now, obviously, you can use any of these items in any manner that you see fit, but those just, for whatever reason, stuck out to me when I looked over that list, particularly an old key. Anytime you give players a key, they're going to think it specifically goes to something, and maybe it does, and maybe it's just an old key. You could almost just be an evil DM and have some fun there, but some groups are a little more sensitive than others, so you got to read them on that one. When the group arrives to section E3, there really doesn't have to be too many mechanics. You want to have the dwarves hiding and roll stealth checks versus perception checks. Sure, have fun. You could really approach this a number of ways. Basically, Dazlin is very forthright and honest to a fault. Norbis is very grumpy and just gruff, and he's cautious. And it says that they banter like an old married couple. Maybe when the group comes in, they just hear them arguing about something, and that could just be a really fun way to just immediately set the tone for what these 2 characters are going to be like. Anytime you run an adventure, whether you wrote it or you're using a preset, it's good to know what the features of the dungeon are, because they always come up from time to time. Now, I think it's good to know that you probably could add some kind of ceiling collapsing mechanic if you wanted to just spice things up a little bit. You know, nothing too deadly, maybe something like a DC 10 dexterity saving throw that deals like 1d10 or 2d4 bludgeoning damage and, half damage on a successful save. And then maybe the spot that it fell on is now difficult terrain after the collapse too. Not something you have to do to make this adventure fun, but I think that could be a fun little additive to throw in there. Just pick your spots and make it fun. Sure. Why not? Now on to section E5, and this is where the fun begins. So this is the main temple entryway, and this is where, depending on group size, you're going to have an Ochre Jelly, probably 2, hanging out in here. And I actually rolled stealth checks for them. You could have them do some kind of a passive score and compare that with checks and things like that, but depending on what your group is able to do with things like dark vision, the lighting situation that they're bringing into this room, there's a lot of ways to handle it, but I think it's pretty fun to even not ignore skills, but just have them on the ceiling. And if they never look up, they never look up, and now they get the drop on them. Oh well. So I think the tactics of the Ochre Jellies here is very important. So they don't have a high intelligence or wisdom score, so they're not necessarily working on a set plan as much as they're working on instinct and things that probably just work for them over time. And I think it's very clear. There should be one by the front of the temple and one maybe hanging over the door or somewhere in the rear of the room, so that when the party fully walks in, they can kind of surround them and cut off their escape. So yes, an Ochre Jelly is a CR2 creature, and yes, that might seem like it's kind of strong for your party to encounter at this level. However, they have a speed of 10, so your party can easily outrun these things, which mitigates the risk a lot. So if you have the one Ochre Jelly by the altar and one by the door, if the group is able to, like, say, overwhelm them with some kind of, the dice is just rolling their way and you want to spice things up, well, there's actually another Ochre Jelly that's in the secret tunnels behind the altar that you could have show up maybe a little bit later, do something to perhaps cut them off if they try to go in a direction you don't expect. I know it's hard to believe. Players do things that we don't expect, but it's also actually why it's fun. But if your players are being, like, overly cautious, like they're just, I'm hiding behind this thing that's 80 feet away and I shoot it with my longbow, you know what, at that point I would actually have the Ochre Jellies just get out of view and retreat to some of the tunnels where they could really start to get a little funky with the group and really get nasty. So they might not be the most intelligent or wise creatures around, but they do know the terrain, and in those tunnels they're only 5 feet wide, which is 1 square in the map. So if the group is moving in, maybe there's an Ochre Jelly on one side and an Ochre Jelly on the other side, and they start to put the squeeze on our heroes. There actually was a moment in our playthrough where the group was in these tunnels, and it was right after or recently after they fought the Ochre Jellies, and you could see the thought dawn on Josh's face when he realizes, like, if a jelly showed up here and a jelly showed up there, That would actually be really bad right now. And that was part of the fun, right? So there was a lot of tension in that moment where he's like, oh, we got to get out of here. So even if the jellies do end up going there and that's something that you want to fulfill because it just seems to work with the flow of your game or not, that's going to be present. And if you can, play on like it's very eerily quiet, whatever you want to do to build the tension, I highly recommend leaning into it. So in section E7 is that section behind the altar that I mentioned earlier where there is another ochre jelly. And it's perfectly fine to have that ochre jelly be there. And depending on how that fight goes, roll with that however you'd like. But I also think it's fine to move that ochre jelly to any section in the dungeon that makes sense for you and the flow of your game. I think that's totally fine. And now we come to the Hall of Greed, or section E11 as the map would show. And first things first, 40 hours of work? Really? Really? 40 hours? I have to put in a whole work week? A whole work week to make this thing passable. Definitely lower that. So the trap mechanics here in the Hall of Greed are kind of intense. However, I'm okay with the risk reward here, especially if the group has been, say, talking to Dazlin and Norbis, and maybe they're able to fill them in a little bit on what some of these dwarven things are. Maybe they found the holy symbol where the dagger says in dwarven ruins, greed is good, but it's, around a dwarf's neck that's, a skeleton now. Because, the greed and the dead and the, I'm fine with this. There's foreshadowing everywhere. Although I will say that it is a little bit of a slap in the face when the gem turns to dust. So if you want to give them a little bit of reward for the skill of taking the gem, sure, maybe it's, an emerald that's, worth 100 gold pieces or whatever you think might be appropriate. That could be fun. Or if you want to have a little extra fun with your group, maybe this gem is cursed. So not only does whoever touches it or grabs it, they don't want to part with it, of course, because that's just a wonderful thing to lean into. Maybe if they attune to this gem, it gives them some kind of power that's worthwhile. Like, say, when they hit something with a weapon attack or a spell attack, that deals an extra die of damage. However, every time this happens, they have to spend a hit die in order to trigger that power. If the player or character there loses all of their hit die, then they start taking points of exhaustion. And you got to be careful there because eventually at the end of that road, they die. And they're dead. So now that the group has cleared everything out of the ochre jellies, they've satisfied their curiosity one way or the other, they have the sending stones from Dazlin and Norbis, and now it is time to leave, and we come to when orcs attack. So it's very simple here. For every PC and or sidekick, there's one orc in this encounter, and orcs can be very dangerous. They're not hard to hit. However, when they do hit the party, they can hit pretty hard. So this is actually a very good opportunity to have just another little threat. Perhaps the group's resources are not in tip-top shape, and that can make this encounter feel a little more deadly than it might seem on the surface. However, I think if you've watched the opening video of this series, this is a prime opportunity to lean into some of the storytelling. You're going to be giving this world some life here. Now, all I did with this was I mentioned that after the party defeated these orcs, now you have to remember, these orcs are desperate. They don't back down. This is going to be their new home. Why? Because Cryovane drove them from their other one. What might that do to a group of people that have been driven from their home? That's going to disrupt a lot of things. Probably how they eat and the way they might be healthy. All I did was drop this tiny little thing after the group defeated the orcs. I said, you know what? After you're kind of looting the bodies, the orcs seem a little malnourished, maybe just not quite as healthy as you may have expected. This isn't going to do anything as far as like affecting their game mechanics. I don't think that's necessary at all, but just that one little seed, bloop, plant that right in their brains, and now you have a little bit more opportunity to tell this story. I remember Josh loving as he started to put together some of the pieces. Like, oh, because at the end of the adventure, you realize that the orcs were living an Icespire hold, and then it just was like, man, that was present from the beginning all the way to the end. It just makes everything feel more just realistic, more immersive. And that's really what we're going for. We're going for a very fun and consistent and cohesive storytelling experience. And if you do that, it's just going to be a nice little detail to add that I think your players are really going to appreciate. So now we come to my just things that I want to leave you with, things that kind of irked me a little bit about this. The term excavation, I realized that, this might just be me, but the term excavation just feels like a big word. So when I was like, oh, Dwarven Excavation, let me take a look at this, I expected it to be like this undertaking. Like there would be like a dozen dwarves with like, archaeologists and like, monocles and things as they're like hammering away to find what's underneath these rocks. And the way it's presented here, you just have Dazzlin and Norbus, which just seem like this ragtag duo that are doing their thing. And that's fine. But there was something that just felt a little disconnected there for me. So I don't know. If that's just me, let me know in the comment section. Tell me I'm crazy. And if that also seems to kind of feel a little off to you, I'm insecure sometimes. So if you could let me know in the comment section that you agree with me there, I would greatly appreciate it. Oh yeah, and if you're going to go down there and comment, you might as well give us a thumbs up. As far as the difficulty when it comes to fighting these Ochre Jellies, I think it's fine, even though a CR2 could potentially feel a little powerful here at this point. There's really not a ton of encounters, and I think the fact that they only have a speed of 10, that really mitigates just how much risk there is and lets the characters kind of really dictate the terms of engagement and how much threat they want to take on. And plus, the whole slashing damage split feature, that's a lot of fun. So yeah, I like the Ochre Jellies here. I think that's a good touch. I would also really like to know if you have any tips that worked really well for you when you ran this quest, and or just how your playthrough is going. If you haven't watched our playthrough, it's up on this channel. It's one of the first things that we did when we started J&J, and we had so much fun. I would just love to share that with you. So thank you so much for watching. I just want to say that if you haven't watched the rest of the videos in this playlist, I highly recommend that you do so. And I really think that the things I've learned is going to be able to help make your Dragon of Icespire Peak game the best that it could possibly be. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.